Well, if you've been watching this channel for some time, you know that I'm an American Motors fan. And no, I'm not ashamed to admit it. In fact, I have to say that American Motors did so much with so little that the company itself is quite impressive to me, and the products that they put out really are quite good. I can't think of an AMC engine as an example that was a poor engine. Their 6 cylinders were excellent and very reliable and durable, and so were their V8s. American Motors never made their own automatic transmission, but especially when they transitioned from the Borg-Warner automatics to the Chrysler Torque flights, those then became super reliable, and they really used a lot of good components, everything from GM power steering pumps to Ford wiring harnesses and ignition modules. They were quite reliable and durable cars, and I have to say a number of them, despite their quirkiness, I really enjoy the looks. Now today what we're going to talk about is a particular American Motors car that was made for 2 years, 1972 and 1973, and that is the Pierre Cardin Javelin. Now, designer interiors are really something that's not necessarily new today, although they're really not done all that much anymore. But Ford, as an example, in the mid and late 1970s, had a ton of different designer interiors that you could get on your Mark V, like Givenchy, Bill Blass, etc. And even Chrysler had, for instance, in the 81 to 83 Imperial, the Mark Cross leather interior. But I have to say it was little American Motors that was trying so many different things with its interiors, and I think some of what American Motors did really pushed the big three into trying new things themselves. More specifically, American Motors had quite a few of these designer additions before anybody else was even thinking of that kind of a concept. They had the Gucci Hornet interior. Ooh, look at that, white and green and red. There was the Levi's Gremlin, of course. It wasn't really a denim material, but it had a similar look to it. And among others, there was the Pierre Cardin Javelin, as you can see here. I have to say, though, that my favorite AMC designer interior was, in fact, the Oleg Cassini Matador. And if I could one day find a black Oleg Cassini Matador, I don't want the white one, but the black one, I would probably fall in love with it pretty quickly. But they are so rare now. And the only one I've ever seen or come across was a white one, in great shape, by the way, but with the standard 6-cylinder engine, and it didn't have power steering and power brakes, and I just couldn't get passionate about it. I wanted at least the 304 V8 under hood and those accessories, those little, I'll call them creature comforts. Power steering and power brakes were creature comforts back then, but hardly so today. In any case, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the Pierre Cardin Javelin and the fact that it was offered only for the 1972 to 1973 model years. And I have to say that this particular spotlight on a product is, I'll just call it a bit wistful, because as you'll hear, I interviewed via phone an individual by the name of Vincent Geraci, who was AMC's lead interior designer during this time frame, and he worked on all of these design interiors. Now, Vincent Geraci also had a pretty storied career at AMC as well as other automakers like Chrysler. In fact, Mr. Geraci worked on the 1965 Marlin while at AMC and led some of the designs of the 1967 to 1969, well, we'll call them large cars for AMC, before being appointed the leader of interior design in 1971. After he was the lead interior designer, he became the director of interior design for Jeep Renault division from 1973 to 1985, and from 1985 to 1992, he led interior design efforts for the Jeep Wrangler, Wagoneer, and Cherokee. Now, the reason why this particular video is, I'll call it a bit melancholy for me, is because I actually cold called Mr. Geraci via phone several months ago and had a conversation with him and interviewed him via phone. And the anticipation was that we would get together and I would bring my AMC ambassador. He apparently had a very low mileage AMC Gremlin with the Levi's interior. And sadly, Mr. Geraci passed away in early September of 2025, and thus the interview that was to happen in person never quite happened. I guess the good news is that I did interview him for about 45 minutes. We had a great conversation. He was an extremely personable person, and we talked via phone, and he was happy to chat about various elements of his career for that 45 minutes before he and I both had to part, and agreed we would get together soon. And unfortunately, it just didn't happen. And he passed away at the age of 91. So this one's a little bit tougher for me, admittedly, because I was really looking forward to getting together with Mr. Geraci, and alas, it just didn't happen. And that's one of the challenges with interviewing the designers and the individuals that I do on this channel is, well, some of them are rather aged, and, unfortunately, life eventually ends. But regardless, I thought that I would provide an excerpt of the interview that I did via phone with Mr. Geraci to talk about the Javelin interior, because one of the things that I found most interesting is many automakers, when they did these designer interiors, like when Ford did the designer interiors, as I previously mentioned on the Mark V, Ford actually was the one that designed it, and then they found, various design houses to basically sign their name to it. Givenchy didn't have really any hand, as an example, in the Mark V designer series, nor did Bill Blass himself. The same was true for Cartier and Pucci. They really didn't do anything when it came to designing the Mark V interiors. And you could say the same even when Oldsmobile introduced its Regency edition on the 98 Ford 1972. There was a Tiffany clock. Tiffany really didn't design it. It was just licensed. The Tiffany name was licensed. The difference, though, in particular on the designer interiors for AMC, like the Pierre Cardin Javelin interior, was that the designer himself, Pierre Cardin, actually designed the interior. That was something that he had a hand in, as opposed to AMC stylists doing it on their own and then just asking Pierre Cardin for his name and paying Pierre Cardin in order to use his name on the car. And thus you get the beautiful Pierre Cardin Javelin interior that was only offered for 2 model years, 1972 and 1973, that I think has to be one of the coolest interiors ever put in a vehicle. Take a look here at this wild interior, and you notice that the predominant color here is black, obviously, but there's this beautiful mix of the black and pleated red and plum and white, along with various silver stripes you can see there on the door panel as well. And it's just an awesome looking interior. Imagine how funky this was for 1972 and 1973. The amazing thing was that the MSRP of this option, the Pierre Cardin Javelin interior, was only about $85. So it was a relatively cheap option, by today's standards. Let's say $85 would be about $650 or so. But only 4,152 Javelins were equipped with the Pierre Cardin interior across 1972 and 1973 model years, admittedly in part because the on-sale date that started these began on March 1st of 1972, so very late in the 1972 model year. Here's another picture of the Pierre Cardin Javelin interior. In this one, the color is a little bit less saturated, so you can see the plum color versus the red. Of course, the white is easy to spot, and the silver is used pretty sparingly, like I said, just on the door panel. But I love the Javelin interior overall. AMC had a very handsome 3-spoke kind of Swiss cheesed racing-style steering wheel that you can see here, and a horseshoe shifter that gave the interior with this center console some degree of sportiness, along with the full wraparound style cluster that you can also see. Notice you've got a true tick-tock-tack there in the rightmost pod. The clock is on the inner portion, and then the tachometer flanks the clock. That was something that Chrysler also had on some of its designs, like on the Dodge Charger interiors. And notice how you have this beautiful kind of engine turnstile looking dash. I think it's just a fantastic look overall. And here's a better look just at the dead-on view of the dash with those 3 pods. I mentioned the tick-tock-tack and the rightmost, the speedometer in the middle, the various gauges there in the leftmost pod, and it has this really true driver-centric orientation that was coming into vogue during this time frame on American cars that was really introduced by the 1969 Pontiac Grand Prix, and that proliferated into other vehicles. I have to say that one unique element that the Javelin interior had that I don't think any other interior that I can think of from an American car had was, notice how that driver-centric nature wraps into the door panel completely, including in this particular interior, the fake wood grain. And there's that little cutout, that scalloped section of the door panel. That's a very obvious continuation of the driver-centric nature of the door panel. And I don't think that any other American car really did it like that. You, of course, had some that wrapped the IP into the door panel, but not the fake wood grain. I can't think of any other car that did that. Well, at least not with that level of prominence. And as we transition here to this particular photo taken from the passenger door of a Pierre Cardin Javelin, notice the headliner. Yes, it wasn't just the seats and the door panels, but also the headliner had that distinctive pattern woven into it. So this was really a wild and racy interior, especially for 1973. There's nothing like it. I do love the, I'll call it assist strap there in front of the passenger in case the driving gets a little too spirited. And an interesting placement of the glove box there facing the passenger. I can't think of another car that put the glove box in a similar position. And my guess is that it's there because obviously the center console was taking up space in the event that the console was supposed to be placed in the middle of the vehicle. Now, as I mentioned, this Pierre Cardin Javelin interior was only offered for the 1972 and 1973 model years, and there were a little over 4,000 of these that were produced. And it's just a darn shame because it's such an awesome interior. And I have to say that the 1971, the second generation Javelin, when that came out, to me is one of my favorite AMC cars overall. Now, that second generation wouldn't last very long. It would last for the 1971 through 1974 model years before being sunset. And then AMC was largely out of the sports car field. So this was kind of the last hurrah for them in this particular field, but at least they went out with a bang. Let me close out now with an excerpt from the interview that I was mentioning with Mr. Geraci as he describes the process by which the American Motors team worked with Pierre Cardin on this interior and a little bit about the designer interiors in general. I apologize as the audio quality wasn't all that great. I frankly wasn't planning to interview him via phone, but he started talking and I thought I'd ask him if it's okay to record, and he said absolutely. And like I said, he and I talked for about 45 minutes, and this is an excerpt of our conversation. Here you go. I mean, how did the Levi's Gremlin, how did you come up with all these, the Oleg Castini Matador, the Levi's Gremlin, the Pierre Cardin Javelin?
Mick Neely was the director, vice president of marketing. And he set the whole thing up with these different people, with Pierre Cardin and Ole Castini and Levi. And so he did all of the groundwork before. And what he said was, in these various jobs, he said everything is set, the contracts are set, everything is, you don't have to worry about that part of it. We've done all of that. So your part now is to talk to these people, work with these people, and for them to do design work that you interpret, do the rest of it. That's your job. But all of the groundwork was done previous to that. And I have Pierre Cardin, matter of fact, he just died a couple of years ago. And I have some nice pictures with him. He and I together, I went, my first trip to Europe was 70, early 70 or something. My first trip to Paris to work with him. So I worked with him for about 3 days. And he said, give me about a week or so, and maybe a couple
Oh, so he did help design it, actually, too.
I'm sorry, say that?
Did Pierre Cardin help design it, or did he just put his name to it?
He designed it. We had to make modifications, but he's the designer of that, basically. Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's so crazy. It's got the design and the headliner and the seats.
Oh, yes. In today's world, that's still, I mean, considering what interiors look like today, that's pretty good.
Whose inspiration was that to put it on the headliner, too? Was that yours, his? Was that just a thought?
I can't remember. I may have some background. It could be his. No, it could be his. No. We did a lot of the work as far as getting the interpretation and the colorations and the screening and working with the suppliers. That was we were heavily involved.
And so you heard it there, that the AMC design team really relied on Pierre Cardin to design the actual interior itself. And they really interacted with the suppliers and helped that vision come to fruition. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this little bit of a history on the Pierre Cardin Javelin interior. And I have to say that, unfortunately, as I mentioned previously, that Mr. Geraci passed away before we could get together again or in person. And I just want to say, rest in peace, Mr. Geraci. Thank you for all of your contributions to the auto industry, AMC, and to history. Let me know what you think of the Pierre Cardin Javelin interior. Put a comment in the comment section. And if anybody knows Mr. Geraci's family, perhaps there's an opportunity to do an interview with some of his family and look more at his work. I would love to do that if that's possible. Feel free to drop me an email. Thanks again for watching.